Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the time has come. It's 7:15, so we'll start the meeting. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Mick Radley, and I'm the chairman. Members, can I please remind you that this meeting is being broadcast to the public via the Council's YouTube channel. As we move through the meeting, please can I remind everyone present to turn off their microphones when they're finished speaking. I shall now proceed with the business of the meeting. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. Members, we have received 3 apologies for absence from Councillors James Coleridge, Councillor Charlie Dervish and Councillor Nick Unsworth. Do we have any other apologies?
I'm not aware of any other apologies, Chair.
No.
I'll make apologies for George Coulthard as he doesn't appear to be here, Chair, if that's okay.
Right, so apologies also from Councillor Coulthard. Okay, if there are more apologies, I'll move to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Please state the item and the nature of your interest. Yes.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. I think I better just declare an MPI as a member of Essex County Council because a lot of tonight's planning Section 106 conversations is wrapped up with also Essex County Council highways, etc.
Okay, thank you very much for that. If there are no more declarations, I'll move to item 3, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Please can I have a proposer to approve the minutes as an accurate record of the previous meeting of the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee on the 27th of July 2022. There is one small amendment I'm going to suggest, is that Councillor Everard was unable to submit his apologies due to an urgency at home. So I'd like to amend those that and record it as apologies on his behalf. Subject to that, that small amendment, if members are happy, could I have a proposer? Don't be shy. Councillor Rose, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Okay. Oh, you weren't here? No, he wasn't here. Councillor Rose.
As members don't.
As you say, you'd like to do that? You'd like the second?
Chair, I was there.
Okay, thank you. The minutes have been moved and seconded as an accurate record. For all those in favour, please indicate. Thank you. The minutes have been minutes are approved unanimously. Oh, I've got to sign. Okay. Moving on then to item 4, which is public question time. Members, I can confirm that there are no registered speakers for this evening's meeting. We shall now proceed to item 5, which is the 4th quarter and annual performance management report 2021-22. Members, the report for this item is set out on pages 5 to 36 of the agenda. Please can I invite Tracy Headford, the Business Solutions Manager, to present the report to the committee. Tracy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Yes, as you have in front of you, it's the 4th quarter and annual performance report for 2021-2022. It sets out the Council's progress towards the corporate priorities as at the end of the fourth quarter and the 2021 report, 2022 reporting timeline, although the actual plan runs for 18 months and will take us right through to March 2023. It was presented to Cabinet a while ago, so apologies, it should have been at the last Performance Scrutiny Committee, but I was on holiday, so it's been put forward to this one. So as at the end of March, we had 8 projects completed, 50 were on track and progressing well, and 5 projects had an amber status, mainly due to sort of supply chain issues causing delays or due to redirecting resources to deal with organisational demands, because at that time, as you're probably aware, we were dealing with the Ukraine demands. One project was closed as it will be reconsidered as part of the budget preparations in a future year. On the performance indicators, we had 8 performance indicators that had achieved target, 2 performance indicators that missed their target by less than 5%, and 3 that had missed their target by more than 5%. At the time of writing the report, there was also 1 performance indicator that hadn't been updated. I can let members know that the number of residents assisted in installing energy measures for that year was reported to Cabinet, and it was 284. That isn't still quite a complete figure, so there's 4 provided, which is BEIS, the Green Home Grants, Solar Together, and Warmer Homes Fund, which is for gas installations, installation. The BEIS only released their figures up to December 2021, so we're still waiting for their last quarter figures, and we haven't got them in as of yet. We're hoping to get them by the end of this month, so when we have them, that report will be updated on our website. So just to go through some of the key achievements for the quarter, we had a high street improvement scheme, which was hugely successful, with positive engagement and feedback from businesses. We had 37 businesses that improved the aesthetics of their properties and created a safer and welcoming environment. The street markets returned with a special market held in February ahead of the relaunch, with food and drink stalls joining the regular traders. We had the new digital demand responsive transport service that was launched. The first outing actually happened on the 1st of April, so one day outside of the report, but it's still sort of like present to sort of put it in here. And obviously, you've probably heard the service is called DigiGo. It's fully electric and it offers on-demand and pre-bookable travel in parts of Essex, including linking Horizon 120 to the surrounding areas in central Braintree. The council also installed a total of 57 new brightly coloured litter bins at various lay-bys along the A120, A12 and A131, and that included 7 customised bins that have large single openings, allowing people to dispose of litter without actually having to leave their vehicles. We also had 6 units of accommodation become available, which is aimed at supporting rough sleepers or those at risk of rough sleeping, to help develop independent living skills and improve tenancy sustainment. At the time of writing, 5 of the 6 units were occupied, but I can confirm now all 6 are occupied. To enable customers to sort of transact with us more easily, residents were also able to sign up to receive their council tax bills electronically, and we had 116 affordable homes delivered in the fourth quarter, taking the total for that year to 417. And the housing service in that year also prevented 246 cases of homelessness through various interventions. The fourth quarter also saw the percentage of people in the district claiming out-of-work benefits fall to its lowest at 2.9%. And throughout the year, we had a total of 1,433 business contacts for business support, and we also saw just over 1,000 new business startups across the district. The report also contains further information on the staffing, health and safety and complaints. On the complaints, we had 128 in the fourth quarter. Of these, 124 were stage 1, 3 were escalated to stage 2, and 1 escalated to stage 3 of the complaints process. Just in relation to sickness, it did increase slightly in the fourth quarter, and we went to 2.12 days. But overall for the year, we did remain under target, and it was under the 8 days. And just to sort of put it into perspective, the percentage of staff that have not had any sickness was just under 55%. In respect to the financial performance, as you're aware, it provides an update on the review of the financial position. It includes sort of like the spend on the general fund balance, a summary of the spend to date on the capital projects, and the report did also include an update on the impact of the coronavirus. And just to give you a quick overview, as at the end of the year, we had a positive variance of 480,000 after allowing for the service carry forwards. The impact of the pandemic on the council's financial position was estimated to be around 1 million, which has been contained within government and other funding that was received. Savings and additional income totalling 401,000 was reflected in the outturns that have already been included in the budgets that were approved for 2022 and 23. The change in the general fund unallocated balance is an increase of 58,000, and the spend on the capital projects for the years totalled 30.6 million, with the majority of the spend incurred on the Manor Street development, the Horizon 120 Enterprise Centre, Business Park Infrastructure, and the Construct Innovation Centre, and obviously the Town Centre improvement works. That's the report in a nutshell. Happy to take any questions.
Good. Okay. Thanks, Tracy. Up to you. Any questions? Councillor Rose.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report, Tracy. Always good to listen to those. Could you just perhaps throw some light on page 13, which is the physical improvements to town centres of Whittam and Halstead? I think it was decided that the council will carry out a tender exercise with appointing contractors, and also highways were going to provide feasibility studies, provide opportunities for new highways layout in both towns, I would assume. Can you just let us know whereabouts we are with that? Because it's got a target date of March 23, which is not a long way away.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Tracy, over to you.
I can. Let me just get some updates. So obviously there will be a further update in the Q1 report. So let's just have a look. So the improvements to the town centres include refurbishment of street furniture and street lighting, new cycle parking, road signage, and obviously replacement of litter bins or maintenance of the litter bins. There'll be benches and bollards that are going to be installed to create more attractive and a functional environment around those town centres. The works have been designed, and the approval of the final designs is going to be sought from the stakeholders and the Town Council and Essex County Council as well. And we're going to be looking to going out to procurement very, very soon. And that team over there can tell me if I'm So that's the update.
Can I just correct you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I understand that, Tracy, that's fine, but with Halstead, and the chairman will probably put me right if I'm wrong, it's not such an easy job for highways to say, well, we're going to redesign the roads. And I just wondered what would their intention be to help the layout of the high street. It's all about putting benches and whatever in. But we've got to get the traffic through, and it's a through, same as Whittam. You've got the high street, you shut that off, and you've got nowhere to go. I just wonder quite what the highways feasibility study will show and when we can expect it to be presented to us.
I can attempt to answer part of that question. Perhaps Nicola will correct me if I'm wrong, to see if I got this right. Basically, there is a series of work packages that have been identified for Halstead. I can only speak for Halstead, obviously. One of which is a significant change to the top of the high street, which has highways implications. And that's where a particular part that Essex County Council are involved in. So there are some schemes being drawn up, and further work needs to be done with Essex County Council on that. But the project is split into two, one for that to be a second phase, and there are a group of other projects which are being actively pursued with the highways coming second on the list. Have I got that right? Thank you. I can't speak for Whittam because I don't have that familiarity. So, but if you like further questions answered from Whittam, then I'm sure.
No, it's fine. I'll just wait with bated breath to see what they come up with, Chairman. Thank you.
Indeed. Okay, Councillor Everard, you have some questions.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 13 again, the introduction of digital demand transport services. How is that panning out for the rural areas? Is it working well?
Okay, Tracy, if you want to...
I'll take that question back and I will find that information out for you and report back to the committee if that's okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
And the continued support for monitoring superfast Essex, the superfast broadband. It seems a haphazard sort of presentation, really. They came out with the links to each household, but people have TV packages and things like this. Well, they didn't provide all that, and subsequently they've done a bit of that. But yeah, so do you have two broadbands and one fast and one that you want your entertainment from? I don't know. But anyway, I'm not very happy with that, really. Well, I've got something else here. Should have put stickers in. I'll leave it at yeah. Oh, yeah, the discretionary scheme, charitable and non-property. No, okay, no, I'll leave that. Thank you.
Are you sure, Councillor Everard? You always come back if you before the end if we do have some time. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Now, Councillor Sphere.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make an overall comment, really, and then end up with a question. I just would like to thank not only our officers, but our Cabinet and our leader for another excellent performance report. I think it's worthy to note that with the increase in cost of living and all that is going on in local council, that to bring this report at this point to note that virtually everything is on track and also being delivered and on time and mostly within budget is quite worthy of note by this council. And I think there's an awful lot of hard work that has gone on, a lot of negotiations, and it is absolutely adhering to all of our strategies and policies in various parts. And I think it's really something that we in Brentford District Council should actually be proud of at this time, because it's very easy with the costs of inflation and all the pressures that we currently have to actually go over budget quite quickly, and I think it's due to officers' due diligence and also obviously through scrutiny and Cabinet that we are in such a good position as a council that deliver a lot of great services to our residents and businesses. And I know that traditionally I always comment about the lack of recycling, and I completely understand that, but I would like to see those go up, but hopefully over time they will, but I completely understand where they are. With regards to sort of broadband, I think that's been really good, and after Councillor Everard's comment, there's further to go, but I think basically overall across the district to be so well connected by so many companies now is excellent, and of course that affects us not only from residents but businesses as well. Also, the amount of affordable homes this year that have been delivered, that's quite exceptional. I believe that those figures would indicate that it's the best that we have delivered to the residents of Brentford District in a very long time. So I think that's commendable as well. And it goes to show how well that is linked up with the planning and the process as well. And really, I'm amazed at how well our council tax collection rates are holding up by Brentford District as well. And also the benefits of that sharing agreement is really beginning to bear fruit now with other the other authorities, local authorities as well with that. So I think that this combination of sort of entrepreneurial spirit that we are showing to collaborate with other councils as well is actually having its rewards, and it's reflected in this report as well. So, overall, I think this is a great point to be at, and I think considering the budget restraints as mentioned earlier, we are in a good position, and I welcome this report. The only question I did note in there that I would like to further clarification on was the some of the grants. I noticed, especially from the funding post-COVID, the length of time to administer those is really long. But I also note in the notes that you wrote, Tracy, about some of the people who are in receipt of them didn't actually want them delivered yet. So could you just give me a bit more information on that, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Tracy?
Can you just tell me what page that's on? Sorry.
I have to find it. You have to give me a moment. Where are we?
You're talking about the Welcome Back Fund?
No, I think it was the. Sorry, I have to find it. It was the one of the government about supporting businesses for COVID. I probably can't find it now. That's too advanced. In order not to waste time, Chair, if it's okay, I'll take it offline and send you an email about it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, Councillor Everard, back to you, sir.
Yeah, I hope this fits in with the meeting, actually, but on page 26, we're talking about the numbers of leavers and all that sort of stuff. But I understand that there's a number of staff who are sort of coming up to retirement age, have had their time extended. Is that a fact? But anyway, I'll wait for your.
Okay, that's the question? Yeah. If you do your last Tracy, if you can.
Yes. So if they're coming up to retirement age, it's their choice whether or not they want to continue working. So you don't actually have to retire. There's no age limit any longer for working. So if they decide that they want to continue working, we're not going to stop them. So it's entirely their choice as to when they wish to retire. We haven't extended anybody's retirements as far as I'm aware. It's always been their choice as to the dates that they leave.
Okay. Any more questions? Did you have a question? No, you don't. It's okay. I thought you half put your hand up a little while ago. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I echo Councillor Shrew's views on the report. Excellent report, Tracy, and great work has been carried out by the officers. I have a couple of questions. One to do with the temporary accommodation, as you have mentioned in your report, a briefing actually, that the currently 6 accommodations have been occupied. What if we come across another homeless individual? Do we have any arrangements for that? Like if we come across next week or tomorrow, we come across someone. Secondly, there is an air quality report which is due this summer. Do you know when we are going to have that? I would be intrigued to see the air quality of this district. I think that would show that how well we are trying to keep it green and clean and keep it up with what's going on. And excellent numbers on 216 homeless preventions. That's a really good number. And a great work, great report. Thank you.
Okay, Tracy, do your best.
Right, so in respect to the temporary accommodation, so these 6 units are specialised units, so it's where we're actually working with them to do some intervention work so that they can actually sustain a tenancy. We have obviously other accommodation if somebody does present as homeless that we can put them in, so it's not accommodation for homeless. These are actually people that have been referred to those units that we can work with them further. Now, these are based in Braintree, I believe, and we work in partnership with Chelmsford, and there are other accommodations like this in other authority areas as well. So this is just what we are working on at the moment, and yes, those units are full, but it's my belief that when people are ready to move on, they will move them on, and then that accommodation will be able to come available for other people. But if there's anything different, I will double check that out with the housing department. If I've advised you wrong, then obviously I'll let you know. But that's my understanding of it. In respect to the air quality report, yes, there is a report that's going to be coming out shortly. I think it's going to Management Board soon, so obviously as soon as that is available for public consumption, I'm sure it'll be brought to Cabinet at some point, so that'll be coming in the future. So, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Errol, do you want to come back for a third time?
Yes, well, yes.
Yes,
But,
go on. Yes.
I was going to say that, we seem to be doing pretty well. And thanks, Tracy, for a pretty comprehensive, well, you always do one, a good one anyway. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no more questions, I've just got a few. I think the mood that comes across here, and which is something I've already written down, was one of recognising a good performance for the year, and with most things being on track, particularly with the challenges we've had of late. So I would like to record our thanks to officers for and all of those involved in this for a good performance for the year. I think that's so I'm getting a few nods, which is good in the comments. So particularly when you look back at Horizon 120 in particular, the new plaza building, the iConstruct, all of those things is, coming to fruition, if you like, probably of years of work that got us to this point. And we're just starting to see some really big projects delivered for the benefit of the district, which is fantastic news. And another mention is the Welcome Fund that has been executed very quickly, in actual fact, and as it's mentioned in the report, something in excess of £200,000 has been given to as benefits to the rest of the people in the district. So that's very good. I still have a little bit of an issue with some of the items in the projects thing where targets are set at March 2023, a lot of them, and it's not clear to me in the report what is actually expected to be achieved by March 2023. So that's just, I think I raised this last time, and I think it's a general comment really. If you look through the projects and you look at the objective and you think, well, it's not clear. Some are very distinct, like delivering the live-ins, date finished, but some of the others are longer term, particularly longer term projects, and maybe they could do with some milestone objectives perhaps for those to break that out. So I think that's just something for the future. Sorry.
Yes, so in respect to that, it's because obviously the plan runs up to March 2023, and you're right. So the actions that we have are actions, and there could sometimes be a number of projects that will sit underneath that action to deliver the outcome. We can look at either having the end date, so they are the end date of the actual project, although sometimes when they're quite big projects, they can be determining what that actual end date is can be quite hard, especially if there's a lot of phases. If you look at the Horizon 120, for example, understanding when the actual end date of when that's all going to be completely delivered is putting a date out of the sky, really. So we do break it down. So for that one, it'd be around this is what we want to deliver as at the end of March 2023. So in that year that we've got that plan for, the 18 months, this is what we're going to deliver. And we would have that information in our performance management system that we've got, so we do know what the outcomes are that we are going to deliver, and that project is just reporting part of it. So maybe I could include in the future a little bit more of an explanation as to what that part of that action or the project that sits under that action will deliver to help deliver or get that action.
Yes, I think that would be useful. I think it's breaking a big project down into milestones, really, and just seeing what is the tangible thing in front of us we're trying to do. Which milestone we're planning to deliver and how we're doing against that. So I guess that's for the future. And then lastly, for me anyway, was a comment about the Disabled Facilities Grant. We've mentioned this many times. The outturn for quarter four is very much, well, it's actually an increase compared with quarter three. But effectively, each quarter has been around about the 200 days, and it doesn't seem that we're managing to pull ourselves out of that long, very long period. And so I guess I'm looking for some hope and aspiration that we do start to turn the corner and get that back nearer the target.
Okay, so I can give you a little bit of hope. It has lowered for the first quarter, so obviously when that goes to Cabinet in October, you will see that has lowered to 153 days, so it has come down. What I will say is obviously with the Disabled Facilities Grants, the reason for those numbers being quite high is due to the pandemic. So the clock doesn't unfortunately stop because we can't access people's homes, or the vulnerable don't want us to come in, and obviously builders are having trouble getting supplies, and they're doing the quotes. And if the people don't want to give access to the builders or for us to actually go in and do any sort of design work around that, the clock won't stop for us. We have to wait for that person to let us into that property as well. So I will say we are still one of the best authorities in Essex for delivering disabled facilities grants. That is actually quite a good waiting time in comparison to others. We are doing some work as well around sort of understanding this and having a look to see whether or not we can actually report out on this differently. What it doesn't do in this is split down what the critical grants are and what the substantial grants are. So that will be both of them. The substantial ones are more where you do need to get like planning permission, you'll need to get designs done, etc. And they are the more complex ones. And we are seeing, especially if it involves children, you can get some quite complex designs and need some, some planning permission. And we do need to work with landlords in some instances, especially sort of like East Lights, for being able to get the agreement to the actual changes that are required to the properties. But anything that's sort of critical, so it's installing a stair lift or possibly a wet room, they are normally turned around pretty quickly. So what we've done for the next report is we've broken that down a little bit so you can see what's critical, what's substantial, and then you can see how, they actually compare. We're also putting in sort of like the caseload, etc. Obviously, I haven't got the figures for the fourth quarter, etc. But we are sort of putting that more information in. And as I said, we're looking at different ways of reporting this out, so it actually provides you with the actual information that you want, because it is a little bit misleading. So 153 days when we know that it's impacted by the pandemic and people not wanting to let people into the property as much as what they did before. So, which is understandable given the demographic they're actually working with in respect of that. So hopefully that helps. Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'm looking around to members now. Does anybody have any further questions?
Except that was one.
Oh, sorry. Well, you were going to ask anyway. Okay, well that's good. We got it in there. Okay, if there are no further questions for Tracy, we're asked to note the report set out in the agenda following its presentation and noting at Cabinet, noting at Cabinet 11th of July. Can I please take it that the report has been noted? Could I have a show of hands to that? Okay, thank you for that. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So thank you, members. The report has been noted. As always, thank you, Tracy, for your detailed report. Really appreciated. You are welcome to leave the meeting at this point if you so wish, but you're also welcome to stay. Thank you. Okay. So, members, we're now proceeding to agenda item 6, which is scrutiny of the Section 106, second evidence gathering session. Please note that this evening marks our second and last evidence gathering session for this scrutiny review into Section 106. For this item, we are pleased to welcome the following officers to the meeting who will provide us with a presentation. Dominic Collins, Corporate Director for Growth, Emma Goodings, Head of Planning and Economic Growth, Sarah Berda, Legal Executive, Nicola Murphy, Senior Landscape Architect, and Neil Jones, Lead Principal Planner. Thank you for making yourselves available to assist the committee with its scrutiny review. Before officers commence the presentation, please can I confirm when you would like members to ask their questions. Perhaps, Mr. Dominic, you...
Thank you, Councillor Radley. So perhaps as an introduction, therefore, to what we want to cover tonight, which will play into your question about how we might want to run the session. Members will remember last time we met, we gave a general update on the background as to what Section 106 is, what it isn't, importantly, and some of the roles and players within the Section 106 infrastructure, but also legislation. And we also received a presentation from Kerry Harding, who offered a view from the NHS, or ICS as her element of the NHS is now called, on the health elements of Section 106 particularly. Some of the things that came out of the conversation, therefore, are those that we wanted to pick up this time, and in consultation with yourself, Councillor Radley, and others. What we wanted to do today, as the agenda very helpfully identifies, is to offer you a presentation that talks about what it is that we do and who does it. So we are a team in force today to give you an impression and an idea about the numbers of people involved in Section 106, but we'll also talk a bit more broadly about who is involved in Section 106 within BDC and what we do. Also in that section, we'll talk about Section 106 process, so how we gather it, monitor it, etc. I suggest we probably pause after that part of the presentation, after which we will then move on to a conversation about the Section 106 holdings that we have as a district authority, and also those holdings that we have for other partners and organisations that deal with Section 106 spending. I suggest we do that, which will be some facts and figures and numbers for you about how much money we have in the bank and how much we're trying to spend. I suggest we pause then as well for some questions and discussion. Third section will be a little bit picking up on the conversation at the last meeting around what we might call key performance indicators or benchmarking, or a conversation about how can we judge success when talking about the spending and delivery of Section 106 projects against the money we have in the bank. That'll be a third section. Again, I suggest we pause briefly after that for some questions and discussion. And then we have a next step slide which offers some officer reflection on some things that we consider we would be keen to progress with, which the committee may want to consider in their own recommendations. But of course, the committee will have many other things they want to discuss as well, either tonight or on another time. Just before I relent the microphone, Councillor Rudley, the other thing I might just reference is that some members will also remember at the last meeting we did suggest and discuss whether it would be helpful to go through some case studies around Section 106 to help bring the subject to life. Having discussed it with Councillor Radley, myself, we felt that actually it may complicate the story even further, given that there are so many different instances around Section 106 and they are so individual in caseload that it might actually be misleading to the committee. So we will deal with as much as we can in the first section around who we are, what we do, and the Section 106 process. And as I said, we can pause after that element of the presentation and take any questions then.
Okay, thank you for that, Dominic. Just a few words before we start then. Members, just before officers commence their presentation, please can I remind you that this is the final evidence gathering session for this scrutiny review. Your lines of inquiry should be kept succinct and relate to the terms of reference for the scrutiny review. Please avoid asking any questions on matters that do not relate to the scrutiny review or specific issues you may have in respect of particular Section 106 agreement or development. This is not the forum and will have an impact on the time we have available. So thank you for your cooperation on that. So please can I invite officers to commence the presentation. Members, you may wish to make notes of the questions which come up during the presentation, so we can put these to officers at the appropriate point. So, officers.
Thank you very much. So I'm kicking off really just with a brief introduction. So I've already suggested the topics that we're going to cover tonight. And just as Councillor Radley said, just a reminder that the focus of the committee's work is around Section 106, but with a particular focus around open spaces and NHS expenditure. As we discussed at the last meeting, it felt sensible at the last session to give some background as to the legislative framework around Section 106, what it is, what it isn't. And then today's session you might have used a bit more practical on what actually we do here in BDC, both as officers but also working with developers as well, to gather Section 106, negotiate Section 106, take that in, monitor its spending, and then deliver spending on projects ourselves and with other people. So we have, next slide, thank you, Jess. We have already introduced the team, but just as a reminder, who we have here today are some of the officers who have a heavy hand in how we deliver and negotiate and monitor Section 106 as an authority, and show some of the different disciplines that are involved in the work that we do. We will, in the first section, go through what those different roles are, what we do essentially, and how we do it. And then, as I said, we'll go on to a little bit to discuss what the process of Section 106 is. So I'm therefore going to ask Jess to move 2 slides forward, and then I'm going to hand over to Neil.
Thanks, Don. So collectively, Nicola, Sarah and myself manage the end-to-end process in terms of the 106. So I think we're the first to acknowledge that we're supported by a lot of other colleagues within the council. So we work with staff within the operations team, the housing department, landscape services, finance, community services and leisure regularly in terms of 106 delivery. But in terms of the lead, it's probably collectively the 3 of us that lead to varying degrees of the different elements. So for myself, I work in development management. Nicola is heavily around the delivery and Sarah around the monitoring. So what we'll do is we'll just try and explain a little bit about our respective roles just to start off. But I think what I would stress just before we do that is all 3 of us have jobs or roles which include 106 but which aren't only 106. So our roles are varied. So Sarah works within the asset management team. So she's a chartered legal executive. So amongst her other duties, she'll be supporting the asset management team in the negotiation of leases. She'll actually be drawing up the leases on our commercial properties, taking instructions from our surveyors, liaising with our commercial tenants, and so on. So that's just a part of her other job or her other responsibilities. Nicola is, as you heard, a senior landscape architect, which I think does her a disservice amongst or as well as the 106 delivery roles. She's heavily involved in a number of projects. So as you would have heard, Councillor Rose, from your questions earlier, Tracy was looking to Nicola. Nicola's been dealing with the back end of the Braintree Town Centre project and is now leading on the projects in Whittam and Housestead. So that's obviously taken up a lot of her time. I think it's also fair to say that because of the skills that Nicola has, as and when other corporate responsibilities come up or particular hot topics, Nicola often finds herself being parachuted in to help out with that. So within the last couple of years, I'm sure you can all remember, we had a particular push on cycling to develop our cycling strategy, and Nicola was one of the officers that worked on that heavily and pulling that together. And for myself, I work in development management, so as well as my responsibilities in terms of Section 106, I also have my own caseload in terms of planning applications, deal extensively with consultees. We're all very involved in 106 and we all feel very strongly about it and we all work very hard to deliver on it, the different elements, but it's alongside the other jobs and responsibilities that we have. So we'll just talk a little bit more about each of our roles in terms of Section 106 specifically. So Sarah's role, Sarah is the Council's Section 106 Monitoring Officer. So she is the one who is accountable in terms of maintaining the 106 database. So all of the management information that we have on that is recorded by Sarah with support from a colleague. She is responsible or takes a lead on managing the process for town and parish councils. So when town and parish councils apply or other community groups apply to the council to use Section 106 funds, it will be Sarah that deals with the application and liaises with them, explains what the requirements are and helps them move that project forward so that we can release funds and see delivery there. So also leads on producing the infrastructure funding statement annually. So that's the document that we have to produce by requirement of government at the end of each year, which summarises the previous year's performance in terms of 106, in terms of receipts as well as expenditure. Also, as the name suggests, monitoring of developments is a big part of the role. So that is a constant challenge, particularly with the high level of development that we have within the district over the last few years. So it's monitoring sites for commencement of development. So there's often a dispute about when development actually commences. And developers will tell us that they're doing things which don't constitute commencement. So we have to monitor that carefully. And then through the course of developments, there will be different trigger points as to when different obligations become either payable or actions are required. So Tracy was talking about the excellent performance that we had in terms of affordable housing delivery over the last year. Sarah's been making sure that partly that is possible by making sure that developers are building and then transferring affordable units at the required points within the agreements. There's always a requirement to make sure we're collecting the right sums of money. So where we have agreements which specify financial contributions which are required, we have to make sure they're not only paid at the right time but at the right rate. They will all be index linked, so we have to make sure that the correct index is applied at the correct time to make sure we're collecting the right sum of money. And there's also a big responsibility in terms of making sure that information is submitted at the right time. So as well as paying financial contributions or delivering affordable housing, developers will be required to submit information to evidence what it is they're going to do in, for example, with regards to open space. So we need to make sure that information is submitted at the right time and is dealt with appropriately by the council. Sarah, I think, is sort of the moral compass, I think, in terms of spending. So if there's ever any doubt about whether we're spending something within the definition of a Section 106 agreement, then we always look to Sarah as the monitoring officer to make sure that we're spending money appropriately. And the final one there, I think I just covered that previously. So we monitor the receipt of financial contributions to make sure that the money is actually received. So not only do we request it, we receive it when it's due. So that's a little bit about Sarah's role in terms of monitoring officer for Section 106. So next is my role. So I'm the lead principal planner in the development management team with responsibility for Section 106. So my responsibility there is to coordinate within the team to make sure that planning officers are acting consistently, because obviously different officers will be involved in different sites and different developers on different projects. So we try and make sure there's a consistency within the team to make sure that we're doing the right thing on each case. Part of my job would involve liaising with town and parish councils when there is queries, but also other interest groups, other council departments, the county council and consultees such as the NHS. So I try to act as a single point of contact for sort of more general queries. Supporting the team in terms of negotiation of 106 as well as the monitoring. So both sort of sides of that is important. Planning officers will have a lot of knowledge of sites in terms of delivery. They'll be speaking to developers and visiting sites. So we try and make sure that we feed information back to Sarah in terms of progress on sites, but also try and help with negotiation. You won't be surprised to hear that developers are often not keen to volunteer financial contributions or to do things which they think they don't have to. So there's always a tension and a push there. There's also a need to liaise with the council solicitor and our legal advisors and Essex County Council to make sure that we're drafting 106s appropriately. That also feeds into Sarah's role. Sarah's also assists us, the planning officers, in terms of drafting Section 106 agreements for us sometimes, but we also use external solicitors as well where that's required. And then in terms of delivery, certainly try and support Nicola and other colleagues with the delivery of 106 projects, occasionally taking the lead or supporting that more directly depending on the scale of it, and making sure, certainly in terms of planning appeals, which tend to be quite common at the moment, making sure that we're getting 106 agreements in place for those, which comes with particular time pressures. So it's variable as to sort of the time that I spend on different aspects, depends on what's going on in terms of appeals or spending or applications, but those are the sort of my main roles with regards to 106. And then the last side that we have here is what we've called our 106 delivery officer. So that's on the next slide, Jess. That's great, thank you. So that's Nicola. So Nicola is responsible for delivery of 106 projects from conception to delivery. So that's not all 106 projects, but it's certainly a significant share. Certainly the the projects which involve the council's open space, be heavily involved in those, but also supporting others where the land is owned by others. But the process there really goes from start to finish. So it goes from looking at initial feasibility, so whether it's possible, making sure that there's correct public consultation carried out, so that communities don't feel that we're forcing them on something on them, without giving them the opportunity to be engaged. Obviously liaising with other stakeholders and members, actually doing the design work, which is sort of what a job title would suggest, but obviously there's a whole lot more to the role besides that. And then there's sort of risk management, tender process, and the actual administration, so the finance, administration and management of the project through to delivery. So quite varied, but Nicola is certainly, like I say, the lead officer in terms of delivery within the council. So we'll just move on. I've got a couple of slides just around sort of process. So only just briefly on this, I'll just ask to touch on it briefly because I know the focus of the committee is looking at delivery, but we thought it was just worth going back a step a little bit in terms of the process. So we think it's really important to look at it as a whole process. We always encourage developers to engage with developers before applications are submitted. If possible, we encourage developers to engage with officers as well. And one of the things we do look at is heads of terms in Section 106. Obviously, it's a matter for individual town and parish councils as to the extent that they'll engage with the process and engage with developers at that stage. And we appreciate that sometimes that can be a difficult conversation, particularly when it's a development which has no support or very little support from the local community and the town or parish council. However, what I would say is it's often still worth thinking about Section 106, even if the council were to refuse an application, if it were to come in, there's always a chance there could be that appeal. If the town and council have particularly strong views on what they want to see delivered within their area, then the sooner they make that known to the developer and to officers, then the more chance there is to try and capture that within the agreement at the appropriate stage. Always remember that whatever we do in terms of 106 negotiation has to be based on planning policies and evidence-based documents. So that includes the supplementary planning documents. So in terms of open space, if you were interested in looking back, there's an open spaces supplementary planning document. So that sets out the basis of how we secure contributions or secure delivery of open space within new developments. So that's really quite fundamental to the whole operation. The Open Spaces Action Plan, which I know attracted some discussion at the last session about whether it's an appropriate title, but whatever it's called, it is an important one for both officers and developers. That's where we will be looking, and developers will be looking to see what projects have been identified by town and parish councils and the local community in the action plan. So, and that's what will tend to populate or be used to populate 106 agreements and the spend purposes. So if we're to stand a chance of actually delivering projects that the local community want, it's important that the action plan reflects that. In terms of the heads of terms, I've just put a bullet point there about the committee reports. So whenever an application goes to planning committee, with recommendation for approval, we will always set out the heads of terms within there, and usually a section which covers Section 106. Obviously, that's a public document which is published before planning committee. If a town or parish council have a particular issue with issues that are on there, then I'd encourage them to speak to either myself or the planning officer dealing with the application, so that we can try and address it at that point, rather than trying to address it down the road after an agreement's in place. And just the last point there, on terms of the agreements and the drafting, usually, as we'll cover, it is usually a joint agreement. So it's not only the district council that will be party to the agreement and the developer, it will usually be the county council. Certainly if there is anything like highways improvements or a library contribution or education, the county council will be involved as well and will be party to the agreement. So just the last slide from me and then I'll pass on. So just a little bit about the work that we do with external bodies and delivery, just to make it clear. I think it was covered last time. But where there are obligations for education, libraries, highways, health, and usually for public transport, then all of those things are usually delivered by external bodies, which we have little or no control over. So in terms of highways and public transport, that will usually be Essex County Council. Health will usually be the NHS. Education and libraries also a different part of the county council, but the same there. So they will be Essex County Council will be party to the agreement. They will be responsible for monitoring their obligations and ensuring the delivery of their projects in accordance with the obligations in the agreement. ECC do produce their own infrastructure funding statement, although I think it's different to some of the other IFSs that I've seen, but you can glean some information from that, although maybe not too much that's specific to Braintree because of the way that it's framed. But certainly in terms of 106 delivery, I think it's important to remember that it's not just the District Council that are responsible for delivery of infrastructure for our communities, it is the County Council and the NHS as well. Thank you.
Sorry, so...
Sorry, is that the pause or is it...
well, I was just wondering if we wanted to pause there, or I'm happy to carry on with the kind of process element.
Can I suggest we... Sorry, can I suggest we carry on the process element and then pause for colleagues probably after next bit?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, that's fine. So Neil's obviously taken you through the steps to the point where we've actually got a Section 106 agreement in place, it's signed, completed, and planning permission's been issued. So after that, I'll pick up from a monitoring point of view as to what happens next with that agreement. Obviously, your planning permission is granted for 3 years, so we've got a lifespan of 3 years where that developer may or may not commence development. So I obviously need to check for that over that period of time. So as Don mentioned earlier, every Section 106 agreement is bespoke, so there really is no one-size-fits-all rule as far as the monitoring process goes. The complexity of each agreement varies, and it's quite different from the days where it just used to be a case of a developer paying a set sum of money on perhaps first occupation, and that was the end of it. They're obviously a lot more complex now with various different levels and various different stages. So the obligation is on the developer to notify the District Council of commencement. My experience of that is that some developers are much better than others, and as Neil said, that obviously telling me they've started is normally going to mean parting with a large sum of money. So the developments need to be monitored for the life of the development. That's often around 2 to 5 years, but obviously the larger the scale of the housing development, the longer that period of time will be. During that time, I need to maintain a dialogue with the developers, which enables me to gain the information from them on projected trigger dates, and also helps me to monitor their compliance with the various obligations within the agreement. So the financial contributions that are due to the council are calculated, collected and recorded, and internally we hold a quarterly Section 106 monitoring group meeting, which is a group of officers that meet together to ensure that they're aware of the contributions that have been received, and it also enables the opportunity for cross-section working where there are different areas that need to be worked on together. It's important to remember though that it's not all about the money. So a large amount of officer time is spent monitoring compliance with on-site obligations. So as we've mentioned, that's things like affordable housing, landscaping, appropriate play areas, footpath links, and also the transfer of land. So that kind of goes alongside the actual financial information that you'll see later on this evening. We're also needing to monitor that continuously. So next slide there, just thank you. So that really just sets out that to ensure that the on-site and the financial obligations are correctly complied with. I've worked closely with a number of BDC officers from the teams that are set out there. That's in addition to obviously finance and any other areas we might need to cover. There is some flexibility around that. It's again, it's not a one case fits all, but generally that's the number of teams that we'll work with to ensure that the Section 106 is appropriate delivered as intended by the agreement. Nick, did you want to pick up on operations?
Yes, I'm just going to add to operations in terms of those teams that we specifically work to. Operations obviously takes quite a large role in that, specifically for the public open space. So they are a key consultee for us in terms of schemes that are specifically going on BDC-owned land, specifically in terms of design because of as a stakeholder in terms of ongoing maintenance and how we're going to manage and ongoing costs. So they play a very large role in that delivery scheme. So we might have a scheme that's just a couple of £1,000. They will take on the actual role of contractor and deliver those items on site for us and those roles to get those items spent. And we have key contacts, which is Steve Wilson, but we have several other officers that take time and input those schemes for us. Just move on to identifying projects for delivery. This applies to most of those projects that we've talked about. There are varying different areas, and this applies to most of those, but we're specifically talking about public open space and the landscape programme in this slide. Contributions are added to the work programme. As Sarah just mentioned, they come in once we've received the funds. So there is a varying different timescales that we could add some of those different schemes in. They come in when we receive the full amount of the contributions so that we're able to immediately spend those. Contributions are listed in the programme in order of earliest expiration date. So we deal with those that are going to expire in terms of date the earliest, so that we make sure that we are working towards never handing any contributions back to any developers. We have two methods. Once we receive the contributions into the landscape programme and we start to deal with it in terms of that date order process, we have two methods of identifying how we're going to deliver and what we're going to deliver in terms of with the funding. That can either be agreement-led if there has been a negotiation in part of the earlier development 106 agreement that it is for a specific purpose. So there are a couple that have specifically in a certain area. Witton Town Park is one of those. There's also Hampstead Ramsey Road. There's several that have specific outline agreements. Or we go straight to, they often have area, so within the ward, parish area, council, we look at the Open Spaces Action Plan for what is listed in that ward and parish and which one of those, and I'm going to go through both of those processes in the next slide, please, Jess. So we can look at if it's specific agreement that is agreement-led, so we have something that identifies exactly what we have to spend that on according to the agreement that's been drawn out. We will first of all look with a very broad brush as to whether we think that project can be delivered with the amount of Section 106 funding that we have. It's not always possible. It might be for a much bigger project than we're actually able to deliver, and we might only have a small portion of the funding. And we do several things to then establish how we could deliver that. Is it something that we want to then go to a capital bid, external funding, something like national lottery funding? Is it something that we can go to other agreements and see if we can put those all together? We then look at the feasibility, whether that is a viable project. We need to do things like land searches, topography searches, whether it is something that can be delivered, particularly if it's a ramp or something like that. Have we got the right space for that? Is it something that we can actually deliver on site? We then go to public and stakeholder engagement, and this can really vary in terms of what kind of project we're delivering and whose land we're delivering it on. If we're working in partnership, for example, with ECC Highways, if we're looking at public rights of way, those kinds of typical projects, then we need lots of engagement with those specific partners. Alternatively, we also look at, we always look at engaging town councils and ward members, and then we do public consultation depending on what kind of project it is. For example, we are doing extensive consultation for the skate parks that are going on at the moment to make sure that we've got full engagement from the young people that are using them, but also those residents that are going to be locally affected by the installation of any of those kind of schemes. That can vary wildly when we're putting lighting in, so that might, or a bin might be a very different kind of process in terms of consultation, so they do vary in how we go about that process. Once we get that feedback from all those people, if the engagement results significantly vary from the 106 agreement, and we can evidence that that has been a process that we've gone through, and we can show any developers that we want to amend and negotiate an agreement to either something that has been suggested and as alternative, or we found a different scheme, then we look at that process. But if the engagement reflects the agreement description, then we can start to go through the process of procurement and budget agreement. If we go to the next one, please. Thank you. So this is a very similar process. It's got all the same stages. It's just that if it is a open spaces action plan-led process, our first port of call is just to go to the parish and town councils to talk about that project. Is that the priority one that you want to go with? in terms of what you've put in your open spaces action plan, looking at the budgets and how we talk around that. And we have two groups that are sub-committees in each of the town councils to discuss those kind of projects, and we go directly to parish councils where appropriate. Those projects then go through the same process of feasibility, stakeholder engagement, and then, again, if any results vary, once we've done that engagement, we start back and go back to the Open Spaces Action Plan and look at alternatives and begin that process again. Shall I hand over?
Nick, thank you. Next slide, please. So just picking up on the delivery management there and Nick's reference to the town councils. So since about 2010, we have had the facility for town and parish councils to deliver the projects themselves using Section 106 money. So a few years ago, we recognised that there was a number of sizable contributions were being secured to deliver projects on third-party land. So whereas in the past, open space contributions had, in the most part, been for the benefit of land owned by the district council, and therefore the projects were in the control and could be delivered by the district council. There's a sort of a sizable number of contributions now that are coming through whereby it's for delivery on third-party land that's out of our control. So in response to this, we rewrote the guidance and we've provided a clear step-by-step process on how town and parish councils and also community groups would be able to access the Section 106 money. So this guidance is slightly different for projects requiring over and under £10,000 worth of Section 106 money in contribution, and the procedure ties in with the district council's own procurement and audit requirements. So essentially, the basic requirements of being able to access the money is that the project is listed in the Open Spaces Action Plan, that the relevant council or group provide 3 comparable quotes for work over £1,500, and that the decision is formally considered and minuted at an appropriate committee meeting. So when Neil refers earlier to application forms that I consider, that's the application process that we have. And I say that there's a little bit more to it than that, but essentially they're the 3 main requirements that we're asking town and parish councils or community groups, if the land is owned by a third party, to comply with, so that we can consider their application to use the Section 106 money on their lands. I think, Neil, you were just going to pick up quickly on variations before we paused.
Yes. Yeah, we've added this slide because it was something that was mentioned a couple of times at the first session about whether variations to 106 agreements might assist with delivery. So just so that we're clear, so everybody's clear, Section 106 agreements are obviously legal documents, but they can be varied. However, to vary a legal agreement, all parties to the legal agreement need to be in agreement. It is a legal document, so that's not always a straightforward process, but one of the things that can be changed would be the spend purpose. So if there was a particular issue around spend, then we could potentially look at variations or deed of variation to the agreement with with all parties' agreement. The issue with doing that is it's not, as I said, not straightforward. It requires all parties to have legal representation. So it's not just the council, but that will be the developer or landowner, the county council as well, anybody who was party to the agreement originally, or is a landowner now, I should say. And it can be costly. So for the council, even if it's a relatively straightforward matter, it could cost in excess of £1,500. A more complicated variation will cost considerably more than that, and that's obviously a cost which would have to be borne by some budget, and we don't hold a specific budget just to cover that. If BDC are requesting an amendment, so if, for example, the only thing that we're looking to amend is a spend purpose because we've been asked to do so by a town or parish council, then we can ask a developer or a landowner to do that. But the likelihood is that the landowner or developer is going to ask for their legal fees to be covered. And it really isn't in their interest to vary the agreement. There's no benefit to them. They haven't promoted it or sought it, so they would not unreasonably want their legal fees to be covered. So then the council would be left with not only its own legal costs, but also the costs of other parties as well, which can be obviously expensive. What we do try and do is where there are variations to agreements, which do happen sometimes at a developer's request, we will try and take that opportunity, or we are now taking that opportunity, to review spend purposes and we are contacting parish councils to find out whether, in the time that's elapsed since the agreement was originally in place, whether the spend purpose is okay. The case in point at the moment, Sarah and myself have been in contact with Peveril Parish Council about a contribution. They were generally happy with the contributions, but there was a particular issue with the allotment one. So we've now approached the developer who wanted the agreement to try and vary that to assist the parish council. Having looked at it or thought about it after the last meeting, I think generally our officer view is we don't think that varying agreements is really an answer to unlocking delivery of 106 projects. It can be helpful in some cases, but we don't have a long list of agreements or money sitting there which we can't spend because we can't vary the agreement. If there is a need, then we will try and do it, but we don't see there's that being an impediment to delivery. So that was all I was going to say on delivery, and I think that's the end of our little section. So Dom's given us the thumbs up. So I think we're open to questions.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much for that run through. I'll open it up to any. Councillor Rose, go on. You start it off.
You were chairman, didn't you? Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 quick little questions. So if I present them to Dominic, and then you can probably allocate it to which of your officers you feel is best suited to answer. This one is slightly hypothetical, and perhaps Neil wants this one. Do you think that Section 106 can continue in its present form? And the other one is, the other little question is, with developers, you said, I think Sarah quite rightly said, it's not all about money. There are sort of little projects that go with these developments. Now, Dominic knows where I'm going to come from. There are certain developments that were built years before anything happened. But when they say we'll build a play area, do they liaise with your team because of what age group do they want it to target? Because when I speak to a lot of my constituents that have moved into the area, they say, oh, we got this lovely glossy brochure for these houses and it shows this, it shows that, and a play area. But my child is 5. What do I do with my 9-year-olds or my 12-year-olds? Because they don't find the equipment challenging at all. So is there any way that we'd liaise with these developers for long term? And the third and final question, Dominic, is I think Nicola mentioned the skateboard park, which I'm trying to get onto the consultation panel because I was on the last one, the first one. But does 106 or can 106 money help provide for that refurbishment of something like Whittam Skateboard Park, given that the nearest developer is 1.5 miles away, and I may not feel that that money is quite rightly allocated? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'd suggest the first one is quite a philosophical question, actually, and probably something.
Don't want to put you on the spot.
It's something that we know, and I think we touched on last time, that the government are considering, and through the new levelling up regulations and bills, that they are already looking. Well, they're indicating that they're looking at around Section 106 and potentially changing that and moving on to some form of infrastructure levy, community or otherwise. You'll forgive me if I don't ask colleagues to comment on that, because I think they could probably wax lyrical about the faults and the benefits of Section 106 and that we deal with. So I wonder if you're comfortable just to leave it at the point that Section 106 is what we have to deal with currently. The government are looking at potentially changing that route. Perhaps for the purpose of the committee's scrutiny report, that is probably a wide question, but I'd very happily have a conversation with you offline over a cup of tea about whether we think it works or not, and perhaps how the government's proposals will change that or otherwise. So I hope you're comfortable with that.
Do that, Dominic? Yeah.
Great. On the second point around kind of how you negotiate what sort of play equipment goes in, I might look to Neil, actually. Thank you, just to comment on that.
Yeah, so certainly with the applications that we have in now, Councillor Rose, I can't speak for ones years and years ago, but certainly the ones that we have now, is usually what we would have as part of the either the full application or the reserve matters. The developer would indicate a play area, and we usually do have the type of equipment that's going to be put in there, so there would be a design. So what developers will tend to do, certainly on smaller developments, is have smaller play areas for smaller children. because usually what you try and do is encourage or have play areas where for smaller children which are closer to properties, so they don't have to walk so far, because it's generally accepted that older children can walk a bit further, and as they get older they can walk further still to sort of the bigger sort of town park where the bigger equipment is. So we do control what's put in originally, and once it's put in, a management company will have to maintain it in perpetuity, so it will stay there, but we don't have the opportunity to go back later on after it's been built and ask them to change the play equipment and put something else in. So that's one of the, I guess, disadvantages of play areas being transferred to management companies now. So years and years ago, all the play areas used to get transferred to the district council, and we would manage lots of little play areas and lots of different developments, which was really expensive and really problematic. So the decision was taken some years ago that rather than us continuing to do that and keep building up all of these play areas and the liabilities that go with it, that the play areas would be transferred to management companies, and the management companies are funded by local residents. I guess if local residents wanted to contact their management company, so if you're paying in a management charge each month from the housing development to a management company, and you thought that the play area was a bit tired or needed a bit of new equipment, there's nothing stopping you approaching the management company and asking them to do something about it. But the district council couldn't require them to do that. Our only opportunity is when it's actually installed originally. And if you or other people don't think we're getting it right initially, and that there should be a wider mix of equipment or larger equipment, then that's something that we need to have fed back to us, and we can take it on board. I think it's always a balance, because if you've got a small housing development, you're not going to have a big bit of big climbing tower or something like that. So the bigger developments tend to have a wider range of play equipment and larger play equipment. So hopefully we are trying to get a mix where it's appropriate on larger sites. But hopefully that answers that question. I don't want to go on too long, otherwise I'll bore everybody.
And then I think your final point was about the kind of geographic. I'll probably generalise it around the geographical boundary within which you can use a Section 106 allocation.
Yes, I mean, the skateboard park at Spa Road is going to be refurbished, I understand, Nicola, isn't it? And I just wondered if 106 money is available for that. But if you said to one of the developers in the town, well, it's 1.5 miles, 2 miles from us, what benefit is that to us?
So if we generalise it then to your point, I wonder if, Nicola, if you'd like to just kind of comment on how far, or Sarah, on how far away you can actually do. Yeah, that's a good point, Sarah.
So yes, there is a consideration to what type of provision you're making. So if it was a toddler play area, then you'd be expecting to provide that quite close to where the development is, because a mum would be walking, or parents would be walking with small children. So if it's something like a skate park, you wouldn't expect to have several skate parks dotted around one town. It would be more, you'd normally just have one skate park in a town that everybody travelled to. So years and years ago, there did used to be an unwritten rule of around about 3 miles was kind of acceptable. So we've never come across an instance where a developer has considered anything to be an unreasonable distance. Yes, it would always be open to them to come back and challenge us on that, but I think you'd need to look at what you were providing. So similarly, if it was a multi-use games area, you wouldn't expect to find lots of them very close to lots of developments that have provided some money, because really you have to put all of that money together to get one mugger in a town, and everybody travels to it. So I think you have to consider what the facility is that's being provided. And I think with a skate park, to expect a teenager to travel a mile and a half to go to a decent skate park would not be considered to be unreasonable by a developer.
No, you're quite right. There is a balance. I mean, it's near the football complex, as Nicola knows, and if you walk by there, you can hear these skates going up and down the skateboard park. But if you lived next door to it, it wouldn't be too nice. But as it's 1.5 miles away, the kids can travel there in literally 10 minutes. So, but I just wondered if money was available from 106, as you say it is, that from developers who may not be immediately close to it. There are other developments in the town, some further distance. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Go on, you go first then, Councillor. Go on, Ezra. I'll go after you.
Yeah, I was very interested in when you said that you found lottery money and other things to join in this, and I know you did this with the community centre at Whittam, and I thought that was a wonderful thing there. And the other question is, could several developers get together, or pool into one big project or something. And another thing is we are in desperate need of a theatre that's compatible with everybody in Braintree and Bocking, and I just hoping maybe 106 money could come from that.
Okay.
Nick?
I know.
Try that one?
I know, but it's...
So sorry, the first question was around, I'm going to answer the first one first, the second one first, which was, I think that would be more of a policy question around adding that into agreements up front. Sure. Yeah.
So, yeah, just, sorry, picking up from Nicola on the theatre point first. So it goes back to the point I made earlier about having an evidence base for what we're asking for. So I think part of the reason that we're really good, I think we're really good at securing 106 money for open space is we've got an open spaces supplementary planning document. So it's relatively old now, but it stands the test of time. So it sets out really clear standards for what we think is required to support new development. So either providing development within the site, so the size of the play area proportionate to the size of the development, or the financial contributions. We don't have an SPD or a document or an evidence base to say to set a standard for new development and theatres. So we haven't got a basis for securing the money. So I mean, apart from the fact, off the top of my head, it would be very expensive. So it would be very large contributions you'd have to secure to do something like that. We don't have the evidence base for asking for it. So we have to have that evidence base to be able to justify what it is that we're asking for. So that hopefully answers on the community building, the theatre part.
And I'll answer the question about pooling. Sorry, Sarah. So that is one of the things that we do consider when we go through that feasibility process and what we already have in terms of agreements available. So if, for example, if there's a couple in the same area for the same district in the same ward and we have a project that needs a larger scale funding budget, then we will look to add 2 or 3 agreements together, or as many as we can, to make sure that we get a bigger impact from those more impactful projects by adding those together.
So, yeah, I can think of a couple of examples. So in Housestead, it's identified in the Open Spaces Action Plan as a desire for tennis courts at the Courtauld Sports Ground. So there's a number of different agreements in Housestead which have secured money for that. And in Whittam, Whittam and Braintree, there's a number of other outdoor sport projects where they're relatively expensive. So we've got a number of different agreements which are potentially being pulled together to try and fund a project which no individual development was going to be able to fund on its own.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple of questions now, if I may. The first one of those was, given the process you identified for delivery of Section 106, implementation in particular, what would you consider to be a reasonable lead time for introducing a single project, assuming you had no resource constraint?
So that is a really wide question that, as we've talked about, there are so many different types of projects that we cover. Although it sounds public open space can be massive, it can be anything from electric bollards, lighting, bins, really simple, lovely planting beds, and trees. It can go, again, to the other scale, play areas, skate parks. All those things have massively varying different time scales and lead-in times, particularly around consultation and stakeholder engagement. For example, we have a project where it is built on an old rail line that needed site investigation works. We've gone through several processes of different designs of how we can actually support the ground in that space. That is off the back of then a long process that was a long consultation as to what that should actually look like off the back of one agreement. So, and there are other agreements that might be very simple, that is could you have some tree planting, please? And that is a relatively simple thing to draw up and make sure that we get delivered, although we also need to make sure that we're partnering with whoever's going to maintain and look after those trees. So all those different elements can take varying different lengths of time, and unfortunately it's very specific to each individual project, because no two projects are really the same in terms of delivery scale and sites and process and stakeholder engagements. You can have the same two projects trying to deliver the same two things in two different towns, and you will have different feedback from different stakeholders, residents that come back and have different opinions and processes, and you have to tackle those and take those into account in each individual site. So unfortunately I can't give you a straight line answer to that one.
How about a range from 2?
I mean, I'll ask Nicola to correct me, but I think it could be anything from a month to 12 months, really depending on the time. I think your point about resource is well made. If we had 15 people focusing on the projects, then it might take a little less time. But I think the factors in each project, as Nicola's identified, help determine the time. So how many partners you need to talk to, how many factors you need to procure, how many different elements of a project there are and gateways there are to a project will add time in. So to your point, I don't think it's necessarily a linear point about more resource will equal quicker spend on specific projects, because each project has a different stakeholder group that needs to be engaged.
Okay, we'll leave it at the 1 to 12 months range then. Okay, the second question I had was regarding the point you made about town and parish council involvement, the opportunity for them to be involved. I'm familiar with the process and being the other end of it. But generalising, how much is that agreement used by town and parish councils? In other words, let's just take the amount of spend that you have in a year or two. Roughly, what would you say? 10% is done through parish councils, 1%, 0%? What sort of scale is that really? I'm not looking for a definitive number. I'm just getting an idea of scale.
Okay, so obviously there we're in the hands of the parish or town council that's choosing to deliver whatever it is they have prioritised. So they might have prioritised a project that's £1,000, or they might have prioritised a project that's £20,000. That's something I don't have any control over. It depends on what they've chosen to take forward as a project and what they are able to, or capable of delivering. So I can't. Again, it's not really a question that we can give a definitive answer to, because that's where we're in their hands and can be led by them. So I'm afraid I can't give you a percentage, because I could calculate it on each year, but each year would be different, and none of that would be within our control.
Yeah, so maybe you might misunderstand my question. It's just I just wanted to get a feel for how much the parish and town council use the opportunity of that process. So
I've had 6 this year that I've paid out on.
Right.
And I think probably in the last few years, I've got the data in front of me, I would imagine there's probably about 60 payments or so that have gone through over the last few years. I mean, obviously some parish councils have used it more than once, because obviously they might have a £10,000 contribution, and they might split that into, they might have one project, or they might split that into 4 or 5 different projects. So it's kind of dependent on that. So I'm thinking number of payments, I'm thinking it's 60 plus. That's not necessarily saying it's 60 odd councils that have used that, because obviously it isn't. But as I say, I know certainly this year there have been 6 that I've already paid out, and there's I think a further 4 that I'm working with.
Okay, so I guess that's probably. But what are the barriers to them doing that more? What in your view are the barriers to use the town and parish councils more?
So, sorry, Sarah. I think sometimes it's a feeling of lacking experience or expertise. Certainly, some of the bigger projects I think can seem quite daunting. So I was just thinking of a couple of projects that we've been working on recently. So there's one parish which would have had very little sort of development more than sort of 7 or 8 years ago, but has had quite a lot of development in the last few years. Sarah, myself and Nicola have all met with the parish clerk and parish councillors probably over the space of about 2 years to try and get them to a point where they feel comfortable with actually taking on a project themselves. So there's quite a lot of work going on, but actually the project they're looking at delivering is tens of thousands of pounds. So actually, while Sarah's looking back and can sort of tell you what parish councils have done historically, what we're trying to do is support parishes and town councils to spend more and to have the confidence to do that. I think also coming back to Housestead, Councillor Radley, with the tennis courts, I know we've met with some people there from the town council, and there was a reluctance to take it on because of the scale of the project. So what we've tried to do is be a little bit creative, and we've tried to identify an additional resource within the community to try and help the town council and the district council to deliver. So we can't do that everywhere because there's a limit to a number of sort of people that we know within the community that can help. But certainly thinking about Great Bardfield, another example, as a community, they're building a community building themselves. They've been, I guess, lucky, but within the community, they've got the right skill set to take that project on. So they've got somebody who's an architect, they've got somebody who's got a legal background, and actually they've got a lot of skills available. And I appreciate that's not every community, but again, I think in terms of trying to help with delivery, we can try and help parish councils and town councils where they lack the confidence or the ability to support them with it, rather than just doing it ourselves. But we can also encourage everybody to look to our communities to find where there are opportunities to try and help with delivery, rather than it all being on the district council and the officers that are available.
Okay, I absolutely totally agree with everything you said. That's my view, that it does depend on availability of skills and expertise. Yeah. Okay, any further questions on this section before we move on? My goodness. Councillor Rayner, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Chairman. You mentioned a point that it takes 3 years, developers, 3 years, once the planning permission is granted, they have 3 years before they can commence the project or start the works. In your experience and the data you have, how long does how long does developers wait before they start the work? Do they wait on 1 year, 2 years before they commence the project?
So the planning permission is valid for 3 years. So we have had a developer who literally started the day after their planning permission was granted. Equally, I've had developers who have started the day before their planning permission expires. So again, it's not something that we can have some idea sometimes, particularly if there's a lot of conditions on the planning permission, because we'll get an indication as they're discharging their pre-commencement conditions. Obviously, planning officers will alert me to the fact that that's what they're doing, and I'll be prepared for them to serve notice, or if they don't, to chase them up for that. I would say a lot probably within 1 to 2 years. It really depends on the complexity of the development and how much work they've got to do post decision before they can actually commence, whether it's a full application or an outline. So I don't, again, unfortunately, I don't think there's a definitive answer. Not very many leave it for 3 years, but as I say, we have had 1 or 2 who've started literally the day after. So but 1 to 2 mostly.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, 1 or 2 more questions. I'm just conscious we need to move on to the rest of the presentation. Do a mop up at the end. One small question.
Yeah, one small question, yes. Thank you, the team for their tolerance, Dominic. You made mention of the community centre in Witham, which is built with some Section 106, but I seem to think there's a consultation going out for a management committee to be formed to run it. If that doesn't come forward that quick, would that be a stumbling block to its final completion?
So I'm going to just seek Chairman's permission as to whether that's in the
I think that's
terms of reference of this
comes
meeting.
within this very specific question rather than.
Yes, I agree. It probably is, Chairman. But I just wondered if there were projects that rely on other people coming forward to complete that particular project that these people have done a lot of work on.
Right.
So I'm very happy to update separately on the specific case you mentioned, but there certainly are, as I mentioned earlier, the number of stakeholders involved in various projects means that it does mean that you need to go through a gateway process sometimes to decide whether you continue with a project or not. So there are certainly gateway processes and multiple stakeholders in some projects, but I think it's a common theme of our answers. There's no such thing as a typical project, so it's quite difficult to kind of give a parameter of that.
Thank you, Dominic.
Councillor Everard, if it's quick, last one.
Obviously, the planning people help to develop the estates and tell them what they've got to do and provide. But I've noticed recently that we've taken over the maintenance of some of these things, although they had maintenance things in place. How do you do that? Do they pay you monthly, or is it an extended 106 thing, or what?
So I'm not aware. I know the council have been looking at whether commercially we want to offer our services. So developers will set up a management company or will have a management company in place to look after the open space within their new developments.
Right.
So the council could, in theory, put itself forward commercially to do that work, just as any other contractor could do. I know that's something that I think the operations and I think Dominic and the other directors have looked at in terms of our sort of future sort of better business, all of those sorts of things. I'm not aware of any specific schemes, but ordinarily, or the usual expectation would be, it will be a private company that do it and it will be funded by the residents of the development.
Okay, I think we'll let you carry on with the next part of your presentation, and thank you. Move on.
Thank you. So I think Sarah's going to kick us off on the next couple of slides.
Yeah, of course. So obviously we're trying to provide you here with a summary of the Section 106 holdings that the council has. So this slide simply shows the total sums received and spent over the last 5-year period. Obviously, you'll note that the receipts are higher in years where housing delivery is higher, so no particular surprise there. If we've got more houses, we've probably had more obligations triggered, therefore we've received more money. It is worth noting, though, that prior to 2016, the district's housing delivery was at a relatively low level. So you'll see in the column on the right there how much housing delivery has gone up over that 5-year period. And likewise, the sums that we've been receiving have been going up too. The next slide, Jess, please. On this side, I've just split the sums that are held by the council as at the 31st of March 2022. So this is a year after the currently published infrastructure funding statement, which was for the year 2021. So this is the 21-22 figures, and it's been split into the different typologies. I don't feel it's necessary to point out that the largest balance sits under public open space, but I would ask members to note that there is £1.9 million held for community facilities and £1.2 million held for use by the NHS. I know that Councillor Radley suggested earlier today it would be useful to separate out what is under BDC's responsibility and what is under the responsibility of others. I think we're quite well aware, but for clarity, the District Council don't deliver healthcare or highway projects. So that's lines 4 and 5 on that slide. Everything else would either be spent by or under the control of the District Council. I know Councillor Reggie also drew to our attention that it would be interesting to see figures from previous years, but to confirm those figures are already available in our infrastructure funding statements that are produced each year. So if you did want to look at those balances for previous years, they are already available for you. The next slide, please, Jess. So just looking at some money that's allocated and the way in which so it splits between the typologies. Three of the largest projects that the council holds money for outside of Nick's remit, being open space, are for a new community facility at Maltings Lane, a new Housestead community building, and also an outdoor sport project, which is still currently subject to approval. But they're sort of three of the main non-open space projects that we do have on that do account for quite a bit of the holding that we've got. And if I could go to the next slide, please, Jess. So as I already mentioned, the District Council don't deliver projects with healthcare or highways money. Therefore, the 16.8% of the money that we hold is not actually for the District Council to spend. And you'll also note from that slide that the health, highways, community building and outdoor sport project money actually accounts for just over half of what we're holding in Section 106 receipts. So as this is focused more on, I know you're interested more in the public open space, so I'm going to ask Nick to talk you through the open space projects that she's currently got projects on.
So I've split these are some of the landscape programme projects that we have on at the moment. These have been split out into those that have got approvals in terms of budgets have been assigned and have got budget approval. So those are the top ones. The town centre improvements, Rose Hill, the Town Hall Gardens and Housing Close. But as you just heard, as part of the process, that kind of budget approval is quite far through that spend process in terms of project phasing. So we have quite a lot of those projects that are either in initial feasibility, we're doing consultation, or we're in the build-up of getting tenders and prices to then get a budget package together ready for approval to spend. So there are several of those projects that are, and this isn't all of them, but some of the larger ones. So Witham Town Park has got a phase 2 for some works to keep going. Ramsey Road Recreation Ground is currently in consultation. Witham Town Park is currently in final design with the Town Council and about to be procured. Courthouse Sports Ground is the project that Neil was just talking about that we're looking to deliver with some external partners. Mill Park Drive is one that we're working very closely with operations with. That is a play facility with a large budget, and Civil Heading and Footpath, again, working with the council over there. And the cycleway on the River Walk is a smaller project that is in feasibility stages, because again that was one that we may have to look for some external funding to actually get that one delivered in its entirety. So they all might not have a budget and being reported on as in progress, but they are all getting delivered in some way along the project phasing stage.
And the last slide for this section was with me. It's really just to reflect on some comments and thoughts made at the last meeting, but also I think officer reflections about some of the constraints around how we can progress this, and I think we probably touched on this earlier. I think it's worth recognising that the Section 106 team is in front of you, aside from those colleagues in ops, housing and other areas that we've mentioned. But we have recently also taken on a graduate landscape architect within the team who works to Nicola to try and support getting through some of the Open Spaces Action Plan projects specifically. And that's something that has come on stream, and Nicola is taking forward with that new graduate landscape architect and hoping to get through some further projects this and in future years. And what we'll be doing is reviewing that work and making sure that we understand whether there's any additional resource required on top of that new recruit recently. The other point we just felt it was worth making was I think one of the things we've touched on already, and Councillor, to your point earlier about time taken to get projects being brought forward, I think we do need to recognise that as a public body, we have various steps that we need to go through around public consultation, around procurement exercises, governance processes, that other local authorities have to abide by, absolutely, but other organisations in the private sector might not need to go through. So actually, if we were wanted to compare our speed of delivery perhaps with other sectors that are doing what you might argue is similar work, I think we do need to recognise that we need to take some further steps because we are dealing with public money and making sure that we're dealing with that properly and fulsomely. As per the legal agreements, as we mentioned, but also just as a public body spending money. I'm going to pause there, Councillor Radley, and I'm also just going to say that one of us will be leaving just given the late hour because of parental duties, but the rest of us will stay and look forward to your questions.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I think it is a good point to pause, actually. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions first, because to move this on a little bit, very specifically. On slide number 20, which is the one about the money received and spent year by year, the data, there's no data on for this last financial year, yet the next slide actually talks about this last financial year. Is it possible that you can add to that information, not now, but as a follow-up to this meeting, to add the income or receipts and expenditure for 2021-22 to that for completeness? Yes?
Very happy to do so, yes.
Okay, thanks. Well, if you could do that as a follow-up. Because that slide really just does illustrate, one of the reasons, not the reasons, the evidence builds up to say that there is a difference between income and expenditure that is quite significant. Even based upon the chart, that information we currently have, there's a gap of 3.5 million of monies that haven't been spent compared with what has been received. So there's a significant gap there, and therefore a time lag. A lot of reasons that you've already mentioned, I do appreciate. There are a lot of reasons why, but that is indeed a fact. So I think for completeness, I think if you could give us that information to supplement that would be good. Regarding slide 21, the next slide, this is useful, good information that's as up to date as we could get, I guess, in terms of the end of last financial year. So that's the first time we've seen this, not been published, so I recognise that and thank you for presenting that to us. But I would like to see, as part of the evidence, the 2 previous years. I know it's available on the infrastructure spending statement, but to have it in one place for this committee as a follow-up action, I would ask that you add that to the previous years, because the total for the previous years was in around 6 million, so it's gone from 6 million to 7.5 roughly. That picture will be evidence that we would like to have in terms of the overall picture. If it's not broken down to that detail, I don't have a problem with that, but and also think it would be good on that chart to have a subtotal for the value responsible for that BDC are responsible for, and a subtotal for those that it's not. As you very eloquently explained, quite rightly, the NHS and some of the highway stuff is outside the scope of your responsibility, or the BDC responsibility. So I think for clarity, although the information's there, a bit of subtotaling would be good for that. The other 2 pieces of data that I'd like to see, and I guess this wouldn't be a surprise given that I've explained this before, is I'd like to understand how, particularly, what the average period of time that those funds have been held. Okay, particularly for the open spaces group of contributions that BDC is responsible for. I'd exclude from that the community buildings, because I think you're quite right, all of those are cumulative and building up to a point of spend in the future. But the open spaces are a range of a number of line items. So I believe there is a very simple calculation that can be made from the data currently available that will calculate how long that money is being held by BDC as an overall average. Okay.
Sorry, we're just trying to work out how easy that is to do for you. Can we take that offline?
You can take it offline. I can explain you offline if you like, follow on how easily that is to calculate. And we can share that offline if that would be useful.
That's pretty helpful. Yeah, we'll take that offline and we'll discuss that. Thank you.
And the second part, or maybe second or third, I'm not sure, is actually the number of contribution line items. Because, again, that is from the data that is already available on the infrastructure spending statement, or the supporting data is on there, right? So, in actual fact, that one isn't, I'll be fair. No, that isn't online, but this is the information that you've sent me previously, put it like that. So you have that information, I believe. Because I think there's 3 elements to this, is how much money have you got, and how many line items you've got, because there are a lot of smaller items in that population. There are a lot of big items, a lot of small items, and a lot of the focus is on clearing the big items, which I understand because it clears the money. But there are a lot of other smaller line items in there that are not being cleared, and clearly those are important to those people that want those cleared. So that, in terms of looking at that, is useful information for us to have.
could I just clarify on that point, then, if I may? So I think for other members' benefit, when we say line items, I think what we mean is each individual contribution that we receive from a developer.
That's correct. Yes. Sorry. Thanks for
So
yes,
I think so. I think that is information that we do have, most certainly.
Yeah.
I suppose it's of what use it can be for the committee, because the issue being, as we've discussed, that various line items will not be spent for a number of years because they will be waited to be combined with another line item, and some line items may be tens of pounds, hundreds of pounds. Other line items may be tens of thousands of pounds, and therefore it's just trying to see what evidence that can support for you, really.
I do accept there is that anomaly in there.
Sorry.
I do accept that there is that anomaly in there, but vast majority, I would suggest, are single items, and you may choose to combine them at some later date, but a lot of them are not linked to others. Some are, but not the majority, I would suggest.
Again, have a take that offline, and we can see how best
Happy
to
to
represent
take that offline and have a further conversation. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to pause for a moment and let some others ask some questions. Hen?
No question.
Anybody else got any questions? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you. Just to briefly on Section 106s, I get a bit concerned about the ability and flexibility of Section 106s with regards to the difference between urban and rural, because quite often developments, according to the strategies and local plans and MPPF, deliver for urban, but they don't actually deliver for rural. And the communities in the rural seem to me not to be able to fulfil their open spaces and requests for public open spaces. So do you think there's flexibility there? Because you can have a large development beside a town, and you can actually have 2 or 3 communities, rural communities, that have also got a large ask with regards to open spaces or whatever. But actually, because that development is further away, it doesn't seem to have the ability to be able to help those people in rural areas. So we're not actually levelling up. We're discriminating in a way through Section 106 because of where the development takes place in the strategy and the local plan. So I was wondering if there is an opportunity there to perhaps look at that in sort of longer term, because I think that's an important thing for rural communities, because they don't have as much ability to get that sorts of funding through local developments, through the development that could be close by.
So I'm going to ask Emma just to respond to that for me.
Yeah, so I think with what you just said there, and just sort of summing up, is really the main point, that what we've been talking about today in terms of Section 106 spending is about mitigating the impact of development, and that development is largely concentrated on the towns and bigger villages. There's a separate point as to if you're looking at increasing play space and open space in rural areas not linked to development, then obviously that's a separate capital project that the authority would need to go through. And the operations team obviously have their programme of maintenance on play areas, but a lot of in the rural areas they belong to the parish councils, and so it's a separate project to this really in terms of Section 106 mitigating development. And we're looking at the places where people will travel to most, particularly with the larger, where we're bringing things together, like if it's a formal playing field, for example, you'd expect people to find it easier to travel into a town or a larger village to access that facility, rather than to come out of a town or village to access it into a rural area where the transport might be more difficult. So there's probably 2 things there around how we spend Section 106 and then how we generally help rural areas with facilities which aren't linked to new developments.
But Chair, if I can come back on that,
Yeah,
my point is, and I get concerned, is that the developments naturally tend to be urban. So they have the greater opportunity to benefit, perhaps to mitigate that. Whereas in the rural, because of the restrictions that are in place from a planning perspective, that rural community may also have open spaces plan and everything else. But they then don't actually get fulfilled. So the rural communities don't benefit because they're not allowed the development. So, I just wondered if there is a option in the future to divert from where there's a major development in the town where the developer could be asked if the Section 106 possibly could also benefit the smaller rural community that's close by. Because also, from the environment point of view, what we don't want is to create lots of traffic and going backwards and forwards to facilities. It's really important that rural communities also have their own facilities as well, from the point of view of open spaces. I take your point, Emma, about parish councils often own that, but I think generally, rural communities don't have that advantage of Section 106 and the planning consequences of local development.
So very briefly, two things that you could do if you're looking at accessing Section 106 money is when it comes to local plan review, which will come up faster than any of us expect it to, no doubt. You could look at a different spatial strategy that puts development more across the rural areas. That would then obviously bring Section 106 with it, but obviously we can't ask for Section 106 on sites of less than 10, so you would need to have bigger developments in the villages, and that would come with Section 106, and you could do that through changing your local plan spatial strategy the next time you do it. The other thing about the potential changes that government is looking at for their infrastructure levy is that if it works like SIL, you can spend it much more widely on other things that you could prioritise. So, for example, we could say that our main priority is we want to build a new leisure centre in Steeple Bumstead, as a silly example, and even money that we secured in Hatfield Peveril could go towards that leisure centre because that would be deemed as our sort of priority list. So potentially, if the government changes infrastructure levy, it may give us more freedom over where we can spend things, but then it breaks the link with the community who's having the development, so it has positives and negatives, but there are certainly there are a number of options if you wanted to use money that you get from developers to help with rural facilities.
Okay.
So Neil just reminded me on NAPER plans, of course, so we've got a number of NAPER plans in the district now. We've got about 15 NAPER plans in the district. They can have their own policies in them and they have as much weight as the local plan policy would. Again, it's related to development, but if you're developing a NAPER plan, and we very much hope Whittam now is developing a town plan as well, there are policies and things that you could put in there, again, around the particular contributions that you wanted or areas identified within your parish neighbourhood plan, which would help with delivery.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No? I've got a couple more, sorry. On slide 25, which is the constraints and resources, you talked about the lead time, and these can be inflated by the process, if you like. What scope is there to improve or change the process to reduce the lead time, or in your view, is there no scope?
So I suppose my point around thank you, it's a helpful point actually. My point around the kind of governance, stakeholder engagement, public consultation process it wasn't necessarily that it is, frankly, it's what we have to work in. So it's not a factor of really cutting it out or trying to modify it. There are certain political with a small p procedures that we want to take forward, but also legal procedures as well. So, for example, procurement has a structured legal framework around it that we would not be able to get around or modify because it's there for the right purpose of protecting how we spend public money and procuring in the right way. Governance processes also are there in order to make sure that public money is being spent to the right effect and also that it's being checked and balanced at the right level. So I am not personally sure that there's an awful lot in those processes that you would be able to deliver in terms of governance, procurement and the like. I think if we wanted to modify the amount of public consultation that we went forward, then I again suggest that there would be quite a considerable pushback from the public and residents, quite rightly, because they want to be involved in that. And the various stakeholders that we work with, we feel are the right ones in order to get that local buy-in and that local support into projects. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest in those elements there's anything that you would necessarily want to play with. I think in kind of broader process terms, some of that in itself is also dealt with by legislation by government. So unless colleagues are shouting at me for some process elements that we would want to change, there's probably processes we'd want to change, but whether we would be able to because of legislative or public perception reasons, I suggest there's nothing been shouting out to us.
So I think the answer is no.
Could probably have said that quickly.
Okay, and the last point then, before you move on, you talked about earlier on, and indeed a little bit on here, about resources. Really, I'd like to see if you could provide us with a statement of what resource you do believe is currently engaged in Section 106 delivery by BDC. I understand that everybody has secondary roles or other roles, if you like, that they play, and therefore you're dealing with parts of a person's role. But I think we should have, as a committee, we should have a statement of what you consider to be the total resource engaged in delivery of Section 106 currently.
So is that an estimation of the full-time equivalent of staffing that are used to support Section 106 activities across the broad
a full-time
spectrum?
equivalent number would be fine, adding up the bits of different people's time, in your view, of what that is. You could either do it now or
so I'm not going to do it now,
okay.
Because I think the issue is how many projects we're delivering each year, how many members of staff across the legal team, across the housing team, operations team, others. So I'd probably want to restrict it to some of the roles and responsibilities that we have probably in front of us here as an indication. But I think I would want to caveat it so very heavily. I don't know how useful it would be for you, how useful it would be. So I'm very happy for us to make an estimate with considerable caveats. And stress that it would be only a really high-level indication.
Okay, if you could take that offline as a question and supply the committee with your view of that situation, if you would, with your caveats, by all means.
Yeah, happy to.
Okay. Well, sorry, I must just ask one quick burning question I have is, you mentioned the outdoor sports scheme. I must admit I wasn't aware of that. Is that something I perhaps should have been aware of, or we're aware? Is anybody else aware of it? We've allocated a considerable amount of money to it, so I thought it was significant to ask what the hell it is.
So it is a scheme that we're currently working on at the moment in the background with various stakeholders. So it hasn't got to any sort of agreement stage as yet. So we haven't presented it, and that's the reason why it's quite vaguely referred to on the slides, because it's not a public scheme yet, but it's one that we're working on and we hope to bring forward to members very shortly once we've got our own internal processes happy. We don't want to bring you a scheme that then our own finance team say we can't deliver. So it's one that should be coming to you very quickly, and we wanted to include it here because it does include a lot of Section 106 money. It's also potentially levering in significant other funding as well, which will be, I think, a really positive scheme. And in the next couple of months we'll be able to tell you all about it, but not quite at this moment. So
it is using, just for clarification, is you using some Section 106 money that we already have?
Yes.
And allocating it to this.
Yes, I think on the slide it's 800 and something of
yes, I remember the number. Yeah.
With potentially 400 that we haven't got in yet, but we've potentially identified as well, plus additional funding as well.
Okay, at that point I have no more questions. Anybody else but any questions? Yeah, Councillor Everard.
And that is, I might have missed it, but are we having a copy sent to us on?
You already have a copy, I believe. Yeah, the presentation.
Yes.
Yes, you had a copy late this afternoon. Yeah, or we all had a copy late this afternoon. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Councillor.
Chairman, no question, but just would like to thank all the team for the presentation. It's very useful information, and thank you for coming up with this report.
Okay, if you'd like to continue with the presentation then.
So we have just got a couple of more slides yes. So that's our last section, as trailed earlier, is really about the point about how we can kind of try and assess success. What does success look like in terms of delivering Section 106? So I'm going to ask Emma to kick off on that.
And I am going to be brief, members, because obviously you've got these slides, and so I'm just conscious of time. So what we've done, we've tried to do, as Dom said, we've tried to do a bit of benchmarking exercise with other authorities. So we've looked at other authorities' infrastructure funding statements. We've looked at, particularly, I've picked just our neighbouring authorities, so all the authorities that we have boundaries with, although I've excluded Chelmsford and Malden because they are still charging authorities, so they're slightly different. We've also got the context of the local plan. We've got the housing delivery numbers as well on there for context. So, Jess, if you just want to flick through to the next slide. So we've got the table on the screen. So you can see there that we've just picked out sort of 4 key facts from the infrastructure funding statement for Braintree and Bold at the top, and then comparing it to a number of our neighbours. Apologies for the Section 106 entered into for tendering and Ottersford isn't on their infrastructure funding statement that I could find easily. So I haven't been able to add that data in. I think sort of what that data shows is that it's really difficult. There aren't really any patterns in the data. The data is mixed. So you can see Braintree on there has entered into agreements this year worth nearly £7 million, which I think first we should just pause to say how amazing our planning officers are to have negotiated Section 106 agreements worth nearly £7 million in a single year. And that is in excess of Colchester and far in excess of West Suffolk and South Cambs, who are only sort of in the millions, having, looking to deliver much higher housing numbers actually. So I just wanted to pull that out. In terms of then the rest of the table, as you see, there's no patterns in there. The one universal in there is that in this particular year, no one authority spent more than it received in Section 106 funding, although Braintree came closest. We were about £100,000 short. But you can certainly see from others, Colchester 3.7 million in and 1.4 out, the gaps were quite significant. So that's sort of the one universal. But I mean, it's just worth saying that these figures are very indicative. Different authorities have different definitions. They have different policies, so they will have different policy bases on which to get their funds in. They will think of open space as different things. So they are sort of for general interest rather than for really detailed sort of benchmarking. But we thought they might be helpful. If you could skip on, Jess, a couple of slides now. And another slide, thank you. So the other thing that I've done is spoken to a number of our neighbouring authorities to look at whether they have any key performance indicators that they look at in terms of Section 106. So I've asked 6 different authorities, including and the County Council as well, as to whether they had any KPIs on Section 106. And in short, the answer was no, none of them had particular spend KPIs. One authority, I won't name them as they said, but I've said on the slide, they forecast amount of money coming in per quarter, I think they do, and then they have to report on whether they've met that sort of forecast. But they don't. None of the authorities had any KPIs around sort of the spend targets. So next slide, please. So I was hoping that would help me provide information on this final slide, but unfortunately it didn't. So first of all, just on there, so we've looked at sort of what evidence we might be able to provide with the existing resources that we have. So the first 3 on there are things that we already report against in the infrastructure funding statement, and they're what all local authorities are required to report against. So you can do that element of benchmarking for them. We could pick those out of the IFS and put them in the Pentana system, so then you'd get the reports through Tracy's sort of quarterly monitoring reports, which could help sort of you in terms of the monitoring. And then the other one that I've added there is the particular one that we're always very proud of in terms of the statistic about the amount of money that's returned to developers, with a target of 0 and a target that we have been regularly meeting. And then just a note on there just to say that the figures we do, in common with all planning data, there's a lot of information and a lot of complexity in the information, so we tend to report once a year on all planning data. A lot of the planning data we report on once a year, and the government recognises in both the IFS and in the annual monitoring reports that the planning team have to do. For the year ending March, you normally then report in the following December, so it gives you that sort of timescale. So that it was just a note on there that if we are looking at more reporting, there will be a relatively significant backlog of reporting due to the complexity of some of the work. And then I think next slide, and that's on to Dom.
Thank you. So as I trailed again at the start, this is really just a couple of pointers to things that we would be keen to take forward anyway as officers, and that the committee might want to consider in their recommendations. So first one is just to talk to parish and town councils on 2 points really. One is around actually seeking additional places which we could actually spend money. So one of the issues is that we can spend money on our own sites as PDC, but parish and town councils will have many sites that they own and have access to that they could deliver projects, or that we could deliver projects on, either in concert with them on their own. So that's something we'd be keen to take forward, to try and find new places to spend the money on so that we can get more cash out the door. Second point about parish and town councils is also just that point about how can we encourage parish and town councils to be more active in delivering projects themselves. Some of the smaller contributions, we touched on that earlier, some issues with some parish and town councils perhaps, or more parish councils not feeling as though they have the ability to, so that might be something we want to support them on. And then the third one, probably the easiest one, is simply just to consider some of the comments that the committee have already made about whether the Open Spaces Action Plan is in fact an action plan, and that we should probably consider describing that something slightly different to be more realistic about what it really is.
Okay, I guess that concludes the presentation now. Does anybody have any further questions? Okay. I've got a couple. So on comments, I guess more than anything, on the key performance indicators, yes, I mean, the items you've listed there are all available now. You could bring them forward to make them more visible, I guess, really. That's a good point. I think that would be useful. I really do believe lead time to spend the money is an important performance indicator, because the whole purpose of Section 106 money is to try and mitigate the impact of the development. Now, if you're mitigating the impact of the development a long way down the timeline, then from a resident's point of view, that's not complying with any sort of mitigation at all. So the focus, I believe, needs to be on shortening the lead time. Now, I know there are some probably constraints. The two constraints could be process or resources. We talked about process. It appears that we can't do anything about process, but we can do something about resource if we choose to. It has to be effective, of course. But anyway, the focus has got to be, in my view, as a measure of performance, has to be about reducing the lead time for delivery. And there is no visibility of that. It's very easy to calculate, and we need to have that visibility and some objectives to reduce it, because that's what the expectation is of our residents, about mitigating development. I understand how difficult it is and the complexities of all of that. We've seen it all today. But you know, the residents who are seeing development on their doorstep expect to have some sort of mitigation and deliver quickly. And the lead time is about delivering that quickly. My view is that lead time is a key performance indicator, probably more important than the value, actually, to be honest, because it is all about getting that mitigation in place at the earliest opportunity. And we're not measuring it, and I think we should. But all the others, in terms of the next steps, I agree with those. I think they're all good stuff. I don't think they're going to change the curve too much, quite frankly. They may tinker at it and make it a little bit better, but I don't think they're fundamentally going to change the pace of delivery, in my view. Does anybody else have any further questions? I've got one comment on LHS to make. Okay. So just concluding my last question, it is a bit of a side issue, but it does come out of a lot of the evidence that we've had come through, that the level of contributions for NHS appears to be relatively low. Compared with the total contributions that this authority secures. And I do agree with you that a great job is done in terms of, and the evidence is there, of getting the agreements in place, getting the money in. I mean, that's all great, and but it's about delivery, in my view. But when you look at the data and you look at the amount of money that is allocated within the total, and I took some examples, 3 examples for Helsted, and even I was shocked that on those examples, only 6% of the total contributions were for NHS out of the total. 6%. Quite a lot for education through Essex County Council, but only 6% for NHS. I looked at one in Witham today, and it was about 5%. So I believe we need to reflect as an authority and engage with the NHS to try to change that balance, because I think if you ask residents what are your mitigation needs for any development, NHS is going to be one that's very near the top of the pile alongside education, and it's a mile off at the moment. So I would like if you could, as officers, perhaps provide this committee with some example. I've given some initial information, but it's obviously more official coming from you guys in terms of just a few examples, 3 or 4 examples across the authority that just illustrates that and bears out the information that I have seen in my light touch, if you like, because I believe this authority needs to be engaging with the NHS to try to reason with that and try to find some better way of getting a better balance. So, yeah.
So on the example point, I would be worried just for the same point that we didn't bring case studies to the committee, because it's sometimes difficult to find the average case study, because there isn't really an average case study, there isn't really an average development. To support your point, though, I think we did have evidence, didn't we, from Kerry Harding last time about the methodology that the that health authorities, whatever their acronym is, use to determine the level of contribution that they ask for, which we have no control over as BDC. So I would be nervous of providing examples, because, as I say, we could pick 1 or 2 examples which might be completely out the kilter of any other example. Perhaps the safest thing for us to do is just to reflect on the methodology that the NHS use, which I think Kerry Harding gave evidence of at the last meeting. I'll ask colleagues just to...
So the NHS use a regional formula, so it's not just something they're applying to Braintree, it's something they're applying to all local authorities in the area. They have a set formula, they see the site, they see the application, they apply the formula, and a number is spit out, and that's the same for other areas in the vicinity. We as officers or as individuals can look at that number and think it's low, but we can't ask for more than that unless they ask for more than that, and they need to have the evidence to ask for more than that. I think that's the issue that we're hitting up against with the NHS.
I think Neil wants to come in.
I mean, just add to that. So it was a few years ago, although not that many. The planning committee asked us to raise that with the NHS team, so we raised it with Kerry. In fairness, Kerry raised it with there's a national body that oversees NHS 106 contributions. So she explained what the regional formula was that they were using, and they confirmed that applied that met or exceeded sort of national guidance. So Kerry was comfortable that what they were doing regionally, locally for us, was appropriate. I mean, what she did also go on to say was, although Braintree are successful in securing the contributions that they ask for, she said a number of the other authorities within the region don't secure the contributions for viability reasons. So she said they can't be seen to be asking for more in Braintree because we're successful in securing contributions, or we think it's a particular priority. They have to apply evenly across the area that they work. So we could certainly write to Kerry's team again, and we could explain what's been raised at the committee. But I very much suspect, just in terms of managing expectations, that we'll get a very similar response, if not a verbatim response, to the one that we got when we raised it for planning committee before. So, like I say, if Dom's happy for us to do that, I'm more than happy to do it. I've worked with Kerry quite a lot, but I fear that's what the response is that we'll get again. So it won't actually move things forward as you would and as officers would probably like as well.
So as a process point, I think Neil's offer's well made. Obviously, if the committee wanted the Cabinet to consider taking that action, that's something you want to put in your recommendations.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the formula and I understand the process. But when you stand back and look at it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The end result doesn't make a lot of sense. And yes, Councillor Rose.
The final observation, really. I mean, I've been involved with the NHS and a project for primary health care in Britain for 12, 13, 14 years. And as Sarah said, it's not all about money. It's trying to get the NHS, i.e. the GPs, to agree, because I'm sure Kerry would spend the money tomorrow if they could get agreement. They just can't get them to agree. And in the paper today, it's in the Daily Mail, so it must be true, mustn't it? You know, that doctors now want to work part-time. Now they think we'd go on overtime. They want £250 an hour overtime. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous. But that's another issue. But it's not so easy to say, yes, there's the land, we get something built, we get 106 to help finance it, but the doctors just can't agree. They just don't. A lot of them are private practices, as Kerry alluded. They're their own businesses. There's no incentive for them to go into a new building. But you might get some of the third, fourth year foundation doctors from the NHS in hospitals to come out as part of their training. But it's difficult. And it's an age-old problem, isn't it? You know, and I get frustrated, and I probably sense your frustration as well. You know, we could build a new hospital in the district tomorrow, but if we can get them to agree on it. Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, okay, thank you for those comments. So if there are any other further questions, I'm conscious of time and holding everybody up. No further questions. So thank you very much, members. Thank you all for your presentations. Really, very thorough and very clear and focused around the issue. So really appreciate the time and the work that you've done to help us and support us with this. So thank you, members, and thank you, officers, for your presentation and responses to members, and also your input over the course of the scrutiny review. You are welcome to remain in the meeting while we attend to the final matter listed on the agenda, but if you wish to leave, you're welcome to do so. Thank you very much for your support. Members, as mentioned earlier, this meeting marks a final evidence gathering for the scrutiny review. The next stage of the review will begin in preparing the draft report, which, once finalised, will be presented to Cabinet for response. If members have any initial ideas or suggestions for the draft report, such as recommendations they would like to be included, please forward this to the governance team so that officers can make a note. It's quite likely that, well, actually, almost certain now, that we will need an additional meeting other than those scheduled, because our next scheduled meeting is for the next two scheduled meetings are for the budget, which we will not be able to take this on board. So I've discussed with officers today, and we're proposing to have a meeting on this topic alone on the 2nd of November, in order for us to review the draft report and agree the recommendations that go forward. I'm sure officers will email that out very shortly after, in tomorrow perhaps, for confirmation. So perhaps if you could just note that now, that would be good. Okay, we'll now proceed to the last item on the agenda, which is urgent business. Members, there is no urgent business. Therefore, this item concludes our business for this evening. The next scheduled meeting, quite likely, will be on the 2nd of November, followed by the budget scrutiny on the 23rd of November, and the first stage of the budget process. I will therefore close this meeting of the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee at 21:38. Thank you, members, for your attendance this evening, and to those watching the broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. Thank you.